My name is Paige Bennett, and I was 18 the day my parents decided my life would be easier to throw away than deal with. They told me to pack light for a short trip, and I did not question it, because by then I had already learned that asking too many questions in that house only made things worse. We drove for hours out of North Carolina, crossed into South Carolina, and stopped in front of a tired weekly motel with a flickering sign and cracked pavement. I reached for my bag, but it was not there. My mother looked at me like she was talking about a broken chair she wanted out of the house and said they left my things behind because I would not need them. Then my father finally said the part that still rings in my head all these years later. "You are a burden, Paige. Figure it out yourself." A second later, their door slammed, the engine turned over, and they drove off while I stood there with my phone, a thin wallet, and the kind of silence that tells you nobody is coming back. I could have chased the car. I could have called and begged them to take me home. I could have made myself smaller, quieter, easier, just to earn a seat in a family that had already decided I was too much. I did none of that. I stayed exactly where they left me and made one promise to myself. If they wanted to throw me away, then one day they were going to learn exactly what it cost them. 13. Snorts. Years later, when my phone lit up with 59 missed calls after they found out about my inheritance, that promise finally came due. So tell me, if the people meant to love you dumped you in another state and drove away, would you run after them, or would you make sure they regretted it for the rest of their lives? That first night, I did not cry until long after the motel office had locked its front door and the parking lot went quiet. Even then, it was not the kind of crying people picture in movies. It was silent, angry, and quick. Like my body was embarrassed to waste energy on people who had already made their choice. I sat on the edge of that stiff bed, counted the cash in my wallet 3 times, checked my phone battery, and started doing math. I had just over $400, an ID, a debit card with barely anything in it, and exactly nobody I was willing to call. By morning, I understood something I had never fully admitted before. Home was gone. Whatever happened next was on me. I stretched that motel room for as long as I could, skipping meals, taking the free coffee from the lobby, and using the tiny shampoo bottles like they were gold. On the second morning, I walked to a family diner off the highway and asked if they were hiring. The woman behind the counter looked me up and down, probably taking in the same wrinkled shirt and tired eyes I had seen in the mirror, and told me to come back in 20 minutes when the owner arrived. I stayed. When he showed up, I told him I could carry trays, wipe tables, clean bathrooms, wash dishes, smile at rude customers, and show up early. I said yes before he had even finished offering me the job. The pay was bad, the hours were worse, and the uniform smelled like old grease no matter how many times I washed it in the motel sink, but it was money, and money meant time. Time meant options. I worked breakfast rushes that started before sunrise, and lunch shifts that left my feet throbbing so badly I could barely sleep. When someone called out, I covered. When a bus tour came through, I stayed late. If the kitchen had extra mashed potatoes or half a turkey sandwich nobody claimed, that became dinner. I learned how to smile when customers snapped their fingers at me, how to keep my voice steady when grown adults acted like a refill was a life or death emergency, and how to take every humiliating moment and convert it into survival. I did not call my parents, not once. Every night I stared at my phone, wondering if they would check whether I was alive, and every morning I woke up to the same empty screen. After a few weeks, the silence stopped hurting and started hardening into something useful. By the end of that first month, I found a cheaper weekly room in a place that smelled like bleach and old carpet, but it had a lock, a hot shower when the plumbing cooperated, and it was mine. I opened my own bank account. I bought 2 more work shirts from a thrift store. I started writing down every dollar I spent in a notebook I kept under my pillow. A few of the women at the diner showed me which grocery store marked down food late at night and which bus route was safest after dark. One of them told me about GED classes at the community center, and I wrote down the number before I was even sure I could afford the fee. I was exhausted all the time, angry more often than I wanted to admit, and lonelier than I had ever been. But for the first time in my life, every step forward belonged to me. My parents had left me in another state thinking I would break. What they did not understand was that once you survive the moment the people who made you decide you are disposable, almost everything after that feels possible. By the second year, I stopped thinking only about getting through the week and started thinking about getting out. The diner had kept me alive, but I knew I could not build a future on sore feet, burned fingertips, and whatever scraps of kindness strangers happened to leave behind with the tip jar. I signed up for evening GED classes at a community center and spent every spare minute studying between shifts. I reviewed math problems during my lunch break, memorized vocabulary on the bus, and fell asleep more than once with a workbook open on my chest. When I passed the exam, I sat in the parking lot staring at the paper for a full 5 minutes because nobody had ever looked at me and seen potential before. And yet there it was, in black and white. Proof that I was not stupid, not hopeless, not what they had called me. A few weeks later, one of the regulars at the diner, a woman who managed a small boutique hotel in Atlanta, asked why I always looked so tired and so determined at the same time. I do not know what made me tell her the truth, or at least part of it. I told her I wanted out, that I worked hard, learned fast, and would take any honest opportunity. She asked if I had ever worked a front desk. I said no. She asked if I could stay calm under pressure. I almost laughed. A month later, I was on a Greyhound to Georgia with one suitcase, a folder full of paperwork, and more fear than I let myself feel. Atlanta felt bigger, faster, louder than anywhere I had ever lived, but it also felt like the kind of place where a person could disappear and become someone new. The hotel job paid better, the building was clean, and for the first time, my work did not leave my hands cracked and smelling like bleach. I checked guests in, handled booking mistakes, fixed complaints before they exploded, and learned that people will tell you everything if you keep your voice steady and your face unreadable. I was good at it, better than good. I could calm down an angry businessman whose reservation had vanished, smooth over a wedding party running 3 hours late, and talk a tired mother through a payment issue without making her feel ashamed. The managers noticed. Within a year, they started pulling me into event weekends because I was organized, fast, and impossible to rattle. I learned how to coordinate vendors, build timelines, manage seating disasters, track deposits, and solve problems before clients even noticed them. It turned out I had a talent for creating order in chaos, which made sense when I thought about the house I had grown up in. I took online business and hospitality classes at night and paid for them one course at a time. I bought used textbooks, made coffee at home to save money, and kept living like I had one foot in survival mode because some part of me still believed everything could vanish if I relaxed. Slowly, though, things started changing. I moved out of my tiny room and into a modest apartment with a real kitchen and windows that did not face a parking lot. I bought a used Honda that started every morning. I stopped checking my bank balance with dread. On weekends, I started taking side jobs helping with baby showers, retirement dinners, and small weddings. First for extra cash, and then because I loved it. There was something deeply satisfying about taking someone else's stressful, messy day and turning it into something graceful. By year 8, what started as side work had become a real business. I filed the paperwork, built a website, and named the company Peachtree Lane Events because I wanted it to sound like stability, warmth, and the kind of welcome I had spent my whole life looking for. The first time I booked a major corporate event under my own company name, I sat alone in my apartment and laughed until I cried. Not because of the money, though that mattered, but because I had done it without them. Every late shift, every motel room, every humiliating day at that diner had led me there. The girl they dumped in another state had built a life with contracts, clients, keys to her own place, and a future nobody could snatch away in the middle of the night. And somewhere along the way, without even meaning to, I stopped trying to prove my parents wrong and started building something that was finally completely mine. By the 13th year, my life finally felt steady enough that I no longer woke up waiting for something terrible to happen. My company was growing, my clients trusted me, and for once, I was not just surviving from one crisis to the next. Then, One Tuesday evening, while I was reviewing seating charts for a destination wedding, my phone rang and I saw my grandfather's number. The second I heard his voice, I knew something was wrong. He did not waste time trying to soften it. He told me my grandmother had passed peacefully in her sleep that morning. For a few seconds, I could not speak. She had been the only person in my family who ever made me feel seen without asking me to earn it first. She never pretended my parents were right, never told me to be the bigger person, never asked me to shrink myself so other people could stay comfortable. Even after everything, she found quiet ways to remind me that what happened to me was real and that none of it had been my fault. Losing her felt like losing the last witness to the girl I used to be. I asked when the funeral was, already knowing I was not going to like the answer. 2 days later. Under any other circumstance, I would have dropped everything, but I was in the middle of coordinating the biggest event my company had ever handled. A luxury wedding with contract signed, vendors booked, guests already flying in, and no one who could take over without risking a disaster that would crush my business in one weekend. I hated even saying it out loud, but my grandfather understood before I finished the sentence. He told me my grandmother would have said the same thing she always said. Do not let people who failed you once cost you your future twice. I cried after that call, harder than I had cried the night my parents left me, because this grief was different. It was clean. There was love in it. I could not be there in person, but I sent flowers, paid for a larger arrangement than I could reasonably justify, wrote my grandfather a letter, and asked him to tuck a copy into her casket, because there were things I needed her to know. I told her that I had built a life, that I was safe, that I remembered every kind word she ever gave me when I had nothing else to hold on to. The funeral came and went while I smiled through client meetings and fixed last-minute disasters with my phone buzzing in my pocket, like grief had somehow become part of the workday. Late that night, after the reception ended and the last vendor had loaded out, my grandfather called again. This time his voice was tired in a way that made my stomach tighten before he even spoke. Snorts. He told me my parents had spent most of the funeral talking about me, not missing me, not defending me, talking about me. They told relatives I was too selfish to show up, that money and work mattered more to me than family, that I had always been cold and difficult, and that my absence proved exactly what kind of daughter I was. Even after 13 years, even standing beside the woman who had loved me when they did not, they still needed me to be the villain. I stood in the empty ballroom holding my shoes in one hand and my phone in the other, and something inside me went completely still. A few days later, while I was still trying to figure out how to grieve someone good without letting people cruel ruin it, I got a call from a law office asking if I had time to discuss my grandmother's will. I almost ignored the call because by then, I had developed a healthy suspicion of unknown numbers, especially after a week like that one. But the man on the other end introduced himself as an estate attorney, said my grandmother's full name, and asked if I was in a place where I could talk privately. I stepped into my office, shut the door, and sat down slowly, already bracing for paperwork, signatures, maybe some small keepsake she had asked to pass on. What I was not prepared for was the number he said next. My grandmother had left me $75,000, not to be divided, not shared at someone else's discretion, not tied up in a trust I would have to fight through. She had left it directly to me. For a second, I honestly thought I had misheard him. I asked him to repeat it, and when he did, I just stared at the framed event schedule on my desk, like the words might arrange themselves into something that made more sense. He explained that she had updated her will years earlier. There had been proceeds from a rental property she sold, investment accounts she had kept separate, and very specific instructions about where she wanted that money to go. To me. Only me. Then he said something that hit even harder than the amount. She had included a letter saying she wanted me to have the kind of security nobody in our family had ever given me. I pressed my fingers against my eyes and tried not to fall apart right there in my office. Even in death, she was still doing what nobody else had done. She was protecting me. The attorney told me there would be documents to sign and meetings to schedule, but I barely remember the rest of that conversation because the second we hung up, my phone buzzed in my hand. Then again. Then again. At first, I assumed it was work, some vendor emergency or a client changing their mind for the sixth time that week. It was not. It was my mother, then my father, then my mother again. By the time I opened my call log, I had 59 missed calls. 59. From two people who had managed to go 13 years without checking whether I was dead. My voicemails started filling up so fast I had to silence the phone just to think. My mother's messages came first, all breathless concern and fake warmth, the kind she used whenever other people were watching. "Paige, honey, call us back. We need to talk. This is important. Your father wants to make things right." Then came my father's messages, which were exactly what I should have expected. Short, sharp, already irritated that I was not cooperating fast enough. "Answer your phone. We are your parents. This concerns the family." Then the text started. "We need to discuss Grandma's decision. Family takes care of family. You know this money should help everyone. You owe us the courtesy of a conversation." My sister texted too, but only twice. The first said, "Please call me." The second said, "They found out after the lawyer read everything." I did not answer any of them. I set my phone face down on my desk and just sat there, remembering every birthday they ignored, every holiday that passed in silence, every night I had stared at my screen as an 18-year-old girl in a bad motel room, wondering if they had even thought about me once. Now suddenly I mattered. Not because they missed me, not because they regretted what they had done, because I had become useful. That was the part that landed hardest. They had not changed. They had simply updated my value. I let them keep calling for the rest of the day. I let them sit in that panic and greed and desperation they had earned. The next morning, after another wave of missed calls lit up my screen before 8 o'clock a.m., I finally sent one text to my father. "If you want to talk, you do it on my terms. Public place, Atlanta. No showing up at my office, no coming to my home." He replied in less than 30 seconds. "Name the place." I did. A coffee shop a few blocks from my building, busy enough to keep them civil, close enough that I could leave whenever I wanted. My mother sent back a heart emoji like we were planning brunch instead of a reckoning 13 years in the making. I looked at that little red heart on my screen and actually laughed. Then I locked my phone, set up the meeting, and got back to work because for the first time in my life, they were the ones waiting on me. I got there 10 minutes early because I wanted the seat facing the door. I wanted to see them walk in, see exactly what 13 years had done to the people who once dropped me in another state, like I was trash they did not want to carry home. The coffee shop was busy enough to keep anyone from making a scene, but not so loud that I would have to lean in and pretend intimacy with people who had not earned it. When they finally came through the door, I recognized them instantly, and still almost did not. My father looked older than I expected, not softer, just worn down around the edges like life had started collecting debts from him the same way he thought he could collect them from everyone else. My mother still carried herself with that same brittle sense of superiority, but it sat strangely on her now like a costume she could not quite afford anymore. My sister came in behind them with her husband Tyler, both of them tense in the shoulders like they already knew this was a bad idea, but had shown up anyway. My mother smiled the second she saw me, and it was the exact kind of smile people use when they are about to ask for something expensive. She sat down across from me like we were family, like this was normal, like she had not once watched me get left behind and then gone home for dinner. Nobody said thank you for coming. Nobody said I am sorry. My father opened with business. He said we all needed to be adults, that we needed to talk about what was fair, and that my grandmother would have wanted the family taken care of. I actually let him get that sentence all the way out before I responded. I asked him which part of abandoning me at 18 had counted as taking care of family. The table went quiet for maybe 2 seconds. Then my mother jumped in with that soft, wounded tone she used whenever she wanted to sound reasonable. She said we had all made mistakes, that I was young back then, that emotions had been high, and that there was no point living in the past when we could do the right thing now. I looked at her for a moment and realized she truly thought changing her tone changed the facts. My father leaned forward and said they had raised me for 18 years, put a roof over my head, paid for food, clothes, school, everything, and that I could at least show some gratitude instead of acting like a stranger. I asked him if he wanted applause for meeting the legal minimum before leaving me at a motel. He did not like that. His jaw tightened and I saw the old anger flash through him, the same anger that used to fill a room and make everyone else smaller. But I was not 18 anymore, and I was not trapped at his table. My mother tried again. She said they were struggling, that times had been hard, that my sister and her family had been forced to move back in, and that this money could change everything for all of us if I would just stop being cold and think like a daughter. That was the moment I understood they had all rehearsed this. The concern, the guilt, the family language, the careful way they kept skipping over what they had actually done to me. They did not come there to make peace. They came there to collect. My father finally got to the point. He said the inheritance should be shared. He said my grandmother had not been in her right mind to leave that much to only one person. He said if I had any decency at all, I would hand over a large portion to help save the house, cover debts, and give the family some breathing room. I asked what family he was talking about. He stared at me like the question itself was disrespectful, so I answered it for him. I said family was not two people who called me a burden and drove away. Family, snorts, was not silence on birthdays, silence on holidays, silence through every hard year while I figured out how to survive without them. Family was not something you got to reactivate the second money showed up. My mother's face hardened then. The sweetness disappeared. She said I had always been dramatic, always impossible, always determined to make myself the victim. She said they had done what they thought was best because I had been difficult, defiant, and impossible to live with. She snorts, said maybe if I had listened more, respected them more, things would have been different. I could feel Tyler shift uncomfortably beside my sister, but my sister still had not spoken. I kept my eyes on my mother and asked her if there was some version of me at 18 that deserved to be abandoned. She looked away first. My father took over, louder now, saying none of this changed the fact that I owed them. Owed them. That word landed so cleanly that I almost smiled. I told him the only thing they had ever given me was proof that I would survive better without them. I said every good thing in my life had come after they left, not because of them, but in spite of them. I said my grandmother understood that, which was why she made sure her money went to the one person in the family who had actually built something instead of draining everyone around them. My mother leaned in and lowered her voice like she was sharing a secret. She said if I refused to help, people would hear about it. Relatives, church friends, neighbors back home. Everyone would know what kind of daughter walks away from her struggling parents. I stared at her for a long second. Then I laughed, and that seemed to unsettle her more than yelling would have. I told her to go ahead. I told her to tell everyone exactly what happened. Tell them you left your daughter at a weekly motel in another state and only came back when her grandmother left her money. Tell them you called her a burden and now want her bank account to fix your mistakes. Tell them all of it. My father looked around then, realizing too late that a public place cuts both ways. A couple at the next table had gone quiet. The barista was pretending not to listen. For the first time since they sat down, they looked embarrassed. Then I turned to my sister. Lauren looked like she had barely breathed the whole meeting. Her eyes were fixed on the table, and when she finally looked up at me, she looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. I told her this part was for her, not for them. I said if she wanted out, really out, if she wanted her son to grow up somewhere love was not used as leverage and money was not used as a leash, then my door was open to her, Tyler, and Mason, my grandfather too. I said I would help them get settled, help them stand up, help them build a life that did not revolve around managing our parents' chaos. Then I looked at my mother and father and finished the sentence I had been carrying for 13 years. I said they were not invited. I said I was not bringing my burden home with me. The silence after that was so complete it almost felt holy. My mother looked like I had slapped her. My father started to say my name in that warning tone he used when I was younger, and I stood up before he could finish it. I picked up my bag, put cash on the table for my coffee, and told them this was the last conversation we would ever have on their terms. Then I walked out and did not look back. Before I even made it to my car, my phone buzzed with a text from Lauren. "Can we talk alone?" I did not answer Lauren right away. I sat in my car with both hands on the steering wheel, staring through the windshield while my pulse slowly came down. For 13 years, I had imagined what it would feel like to face my parents again. I thought maybe I would feel triumphant or angry or finally healed. What I felt instead was clear. They had not changed. They had not come for me. They had come for what they thought they could still take. A few minutes later, my phone rang again. This time, it was my grandfather. Snorts. His voice sounded tired but not surprised. He told me my father had already called him twice, furious, demanding that he talk sense into me and remind me what family owed each other. Then my grandfather said something that made me lean back in my seat and close my eyes. He said, "Your father is not asking because he is hurt. He is asking because he is drowning." That was when he finally told me everything. A few years earlier, my father had borrowed against the house to buy into a business deal he thought would turn quick money. It failed. Then he doubled down trying to fix it, lost more, and started covering old debt with new debt until there was no difference between the two. Credit cards were maxed out. Bills were late. The house was hanging by a thread. My mother had spent years pretending everything was fine, protecting appearances, lying to relatives, lying to church friends, lying to herself. Lauren and Tyler had moved back in because they could not afford rent after Tyler lost hours at work. But instead of helping them get back on their feet, my parents turned them into part of the same broken system. Everyone in that house was expected to orbit my father's pride and my mother's denial. My grandfather told me he had stayed quiet because he did not want to drag me back into it, but after what happened at the coffee shop, he was done protecting people who had never protected me. That night, Lauren and I met at a diner halfway between our places. She came alone. No parents, no performance, no excuses. She looked exhausted, and for the first time in my life, not like the girl who had always stayed on the safer side of the line. She told me she had spent years believing what our parents said about me because it was easier than questioning the whole house. They told her I was selfish, unstable, impossible, and she let herself believe it because if I was the problem, then she did not have to admit what kind of people were raising us. But sitting at that coffee shop and hearing them talk to me like I was an account they were trying to close, something in her finally cracked. She said the worst part was realizing they were starting to do the same thing to Mason in smaller ways. Conditional affection, quiet guilt, love that always came with a price tag attached. She looked at me across that sticky diner table and said she did not want her son growing up learning that family meant fear, debt, and emotional blackmail. I asked her if she was really ready to leave. She said yes, but this time it sounded less like confidence and more like someone choosing truth over comfort. I told her my offer stood. Her, Tyler, Mason, and Grandpa. Not as charity, not as leverage, as a chance to build something healthier than what we came from. 2 weeks later, I used part of the inheritance the way my grandmother would have wanted. Not to rescue the people who threw me away, but to create stability for the people still worth saving. I bought a house outside Atlanta with a big backyard, a downstairs suite for my grandfather, enough space for Lauren and her family upstairs, and a kitchen large enough to hold the kind of noise that sounds like safety instead of stress. Tyler helped paint on the weekends before they moved in. Mason picked his room and talked about the backyard like we had bought him a kingdom. My grandfather cried the first night, though he tried to hide it by pretending his allergies were acting up. As for my parents, they did exactly what I knew they would do. They called, they texted, they left voicemails swinging between rage and self-pity. My mother said I had turned everyone against them. My father said I was destroying the family. The truth was simpler than that. I was just refusing to keep carrying people who had mistaken cruelty for authority. When relatives started hearing different versions of the story, I did not chase anyone down to defend myself. I did not need to. My grandfather spoke when he felt like speaking. Lauren told the truth when people asked. And the truth, when left alone long enough, has a way of making all by itself. A few months later, an old neighbor from back home called to say the bank had finally foreclosed on my parents' house. They had moved into a small apartment and were telling anyone who would listen that their children had abandoned them. I thanked her for the update, then I went back inside and helped Mason with a school project at the kitchen table. That was the moment it really hit me. I was no longer living in reaction to what they had done. I had crossed into something better, a life they could not define, ruin, or control. These days, Sunday dinners are loud in the best way. Tyler grills in the backyard. Lauren laughs more easily than she used to. My grandfather sits at the head of the table like peace is something he still cannot quite believe he gets to keep. And sometimes, I catch myself looking around that house and thinking about the girl in the motel parking lot, the one with the thin wallet and the empty phone, and the two taillights disappearing into the dark. She thought she had been left with nothing. What she really had was a chance to build a life from the ground up and decide for herself what love would look like inside it. That is the lesson I carry now. Family is not made sacred just because it shares your blood. Real family protects. Real family tells the truth. Real family does not make you earn the right to be treated like you matter. Walking away from people who hurt you is not cruelty. Sometimes it is wisdom. Sometimes it is survival. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do is close the door on what broke you, then open a new one for the people ready to heal. My parents gave me abandonment. My grandmother gave me a chance. What I built from that chance became the one thing they could never take back. At Revenge Nickel, our team is committed to creating powerful, meaningful scripts that connect with viewers through emotion, reflection, and life lessons. Every story on this channel is fictional and created for entertainment and educational purposes, with the goal of sharing valuable messages and thought-provoking experiences. This script highlights the importance of self-worth, emotional resilience, and setting healthy boundaries with people who cause harm, even when they are relatives. It reminds viewers that true support is built on love, respect, and accountability, not guilt or control. Through Paige's journey, the story encourages people to value personal growth, protect their peace, and build a better future from painful beginnings.